Hello, everyone. This is Rebecca. Andrea and I just wanted to give a note of thanks to each and every one of you. We are so appreciative for everyone who has listened, who is following us on Apple or Spotify, and who has sent us personal and encouraging messages through email, DMs, and texts. We love your encouragement. It means so much, and it inspires us to keep moving forward with our devotion to grief work. We love the space we're creating through the podcast, making room in the world to grieve and support one another as we offer opportunities for love and belonging within our grief. Many of you have asked how you can support. Thank you for this question. There are a few ways. First, be sure you have subscribed to the podcast. Second, please share your favorite episode and help us expand our reach. And third, every dime that we put into this passion project currently comes out of our own pockets. So if you're able to support even a little, head over to buymeacoffee.com/allthegriefpod and buy us a coffee. What we'll really use that money for is to support the editing and production costs for our podcast. Every cup helps tremendously. Thank you again for everything that you do. It's not always easy to sit with conversations on grief, and we appreciate you being part of these conversations. Speaking of that, you can also reach out to us anytime to send some love and encouragement on our Instagram page at allthegriefpod. We'll see you soon. Hello, and welcome to All the Grief, a regular podcast for all those who have been touched by grief. We are your hosts. I am Rebecca Luttrell.
And I am Andrea Gibson. We are two friends, a therapist, and a social scientist, both highly sensitive fellow grievers here to share our hearts as we talk about all the grief. Good morning, Rebecca.
Good morning.
How is your heart this morning?
Oh, my heart is so tender today. I feel on the verge of tears constantly this morning, and there were a lot of different things that have arisen. One of them right now is just some interesting stuff happening for my daughter in her friend group. And I mean, I want to protect her anonymity, and it's her story in so many ways, but there's like mother grief up where I just want to like protect her from some of the judgment and harshness of the world. And I know it's part of all of our journeys. So there's just that grief of acceptance and feeling like I can't save her from this, and I can do my best to empower her, but can't carpet the world, and also shouldn't. It is important to learn these things in her own body. So just feeling some grief around that. What about you?
I just want to sort of sit with that, being a mom, but also sort of knowing and loving Talia and just wanting to hold her in my heart and trying to be like, how do I get to be both mama bear and allow her own journey,
Yeah, it's not easy.
My heart, I was feeling a little bit anxious. And then I was remembering I just returned from the work that pays me. And and something that somebody said, and I had heard it on a podcast, but it was so beautiful to hear yesterday. We were sort of facilitating, and there were some true deep introverts in the group who were really anxious about having to talk to people all day long, which I can validate. One of them, I decided to interview them, and he lived on a submarine. Very, very introverted, does not come out of his house, and came out for this facilitation. And I was so grateful that he took a risk. And he said, I'm just trying to turn my anxiety into excitement, get my butterflies in formation. And I was like,
That's so
that is the most
sweet.
amazing thing. I was like,
Wow.
come on, butterflies, get in formation. So
Hmm.
I'm just kind of playing with that right now of settling into the same feeling that excitement and anxiety bring and leaning into the excitement side of it. So that's where it is. My butterflies are forming up, and I can't wait to see what kind of formation my butterflies would get into.
Oh, I love that. That's so cool. I love that kind of wisdom when it comes through. Yeah. And so, speaking of wisdom, I'm going to introduce our next guest who has already let us know that they are not feeling the wisest today. And that's just great. So, Andrea Gibson is our guest today. And if you don't know Andrea, Andrea is the Poet Laureate of Colorado and one of the most celebrated and influential spoken word poets of our time. Best known for their live performances, Gibson has changed the landscape of what it means to attend a poetry show. Gibson's poems center around LGBTQ issues, gender, feminism, mental health, and social justice. The winner of the first Women's World Poetry Slam, Gibson is the author of 7 award winning books. Most recently, You Better Be Lightning. Their live shows have become loving and supportive ecosystems for audiences to feel seen, heard, and held through Gibson's art. And personally, Andrea and I have been friends for 11 years, which is super cool. And we were neighbors 11 years ago. And Andrea is no stranger to anxiety, and that almost got in the way of us becoming friends. Because I thought Andrea was incredibly unfriendly, but I was wrong. It was anxiety. And so, Andrea, welcome. And how is your heart today?
Oh, well, my heart is really a lot better after listening to the idea of butterflies getting into formation. I love that so much, and also living on a submarine. It
I know.
I love that idea because my therapist years ago said that fear is excitement without the breath. Have you ever heard that
Mm.
phrase? That
No, but
they're almost identical in the body, but when we're feeling fear, we're not breathing.
Mm.
And it's interesting. So she's like, just try breathing when you're scared and see if you can tap into the energy of excitement because very often it's similar. Like when I'm stepping on stage, for example,
right.
I think I'm terrified, but really what's happening is I'm very, very excited.
Mm.
My heart. So I've been crying all morning.
Mm,
I woke up and I've had this pain. So, just for your listeners that don't know, I have ovarian cancer, and I've been in treatment for the last 3 years.
mm,
And about a year ago, they declared it incurable, which Rebecca and I are like,
Mm.
the doctors declare it incurable. What do the witches and the angels say?
I love it.
100%.
But, I've been having this pain. I had a bone metastasis that I treated with radiation, and now I'm having another bone spot that's hurting. And so I'm like, hmm.
Mm,
And so I woke up with grief about that. And then some loneliness, I think, about the way that my partner and I process this time differently in those moments. And so we were trying to figure out how to connect about our different processing ways. And then when I was thinking, how am I going to show up and talk about all my massive amount of wisdom, stage 4 wisdom? And I'm
stage
like,
4.
oh, no, wait. I know at least one of these people is a therapist. And so, and I don't even have to pay to go to this podcast today. So I'm showing up. So that's where I am.
Beautiful. Thank
And
you.
we are so glad that you are here.
Mhm.
Yes. Well, do you want to share the story about the submarine and the link you were making? Because I think you're talking about the hyperbaric chamber.
Been doing hyperbaric oxygen chamber treatment, which is they call them dives.
Oh,
So everything when you walk in there, it's like you're walking into like a submarine
Mm.
exhibit, basically. And so they take you to a low, low, low below sea level pressure for the oxygen to be pushed in your cells.
Mm.
And it's been one of the most terrifying things I've ever done. I mean,
mm,
of all the treatments that I've done, this one has scared me the most. And I'm 36 treatments in and I have 4 left.
Mm.
And I thought that I would round a corner at some point, and I kind of did a few days ago. But this is really interesting. For the first whole beginning sessions of this, I mean, I would say like 20 sessions, I was feeling so much fear. Then around 20, I just would get in there and just feel an enormity of grief, like a massive
mm,
amount of grief. And it was because I couldn't access anybody on the outside. So
mm.
you're locked in this little tube for like 2 hours.
Oh,
And the scary thing about it for me is just that if they need to get you out, it takes them 10 minutes to get
Oh.
you out. And so that's the thing that like tricks up my brain a little bit because they have to bring you slowly up to pressure so your eardrums don't burst.
Mm.
yeah.
It's been a wild experience to switch from fear to grief and then recognize that all of my fear before wasn't fear, it was grief. And I
Mm,
think that if I allow myself to cry when I'm feeling fear, then I
Mm.
recognize that it's truly grief under there, and then I can move it. But every time I go in there, and these are glass things so everybody can see me, I spend the first 20 minutes sobbing. So,
Mm.
yeah.
Wow.
Wow. And do you know, I mean, when you say it's grief, is that because there are tears or is it a specific grief that you feel?
It doesn't often even have, like, images attached to it.
Mm.
It just feels purely physical in my body, and it feels about the separation,
Mm.
the sense that I couldn't in any moment reach for even a stranger's arm if I needed to.
Mm.
It's
Mhm.
just this feeling that I think is almost in some ways simulating the death experience,
Mm.
or what my scared mind thinks of the death experience, not
Mm.
what I actually believe of the death experience. But it's just that I can't, like, there I am and I'm locked away from other
Mm.
people. So what my
Mm.
fear believes of death, but not what my spirit does.
Oh,
Mm.
that's so beautiful. I can resonate with both sides of that because I think I also have some of that conditioning that death is sort of this locked away experience and cut off
Yeah.
from the people that you love. But there is just something like very vulnerable about that. And so that 10 minutes of like, regardless of if you want to get out of that in a moment, you're 10 minutes away from someone's touch.
Yeah. And I bring my partner with me, and she's so she's so kind to come, and she sits right beside me and she just reads the whole time. And that really comforts me, but I think that I might be realizing that it's also that she's right there and not able to be reached. So we really can't hear each other unless she goes and picks up a phone to talk to me. And so
Mm.
it's also the
Wow.
distance and the closeness. Like, she's
Mm.
literally right there, but yeah, so
Oh, wow. Does she go down into the depths? Does she also go below?
no, it's just, it's a tube the size of a coffin.
Just to keep on our death metaphor.
Yeah, and I just lay there, and she just sits in a chair right beside me and is like, you should put her hand on her heart and be like, "I love you," and I'm like,
Yeah.
"I love you too." And yeah.
Mm. I mean, we have some thoughts of where we can take this conversation today, but I always love where it goes organically. So we'll just sort of start somewhere and meander through grief, through
Okay,
the meadows of
great.
grief. So I've been thinking a lot about, and one of those starting points of why we asked you on was just to talk about poetry and grief, because there's so much that can be expressed in poetry that can be more universal than whenever we're speaking directly about our grief. And I'm curious how your poetry has helped you process grief in your life, or how grief comes up or doesn't come up in your poetry.
Gosh, I was thinking about this and I'm like, I think I could talk for hours about this because there there have been so many different phases in my life in regards to how I have used poetry to navigate grief. In the very beginning, what I did a lot in my writing when I guess my early 20s, when I discovered spoken word poetry.
Mhm.
And for people who don't know, I write my poetry to be spoken out loud. And Maya Angelou said that an unspoken poem is a half finished poem. And friends
Mm.
have argued with me about that, but I love it. There's something about it that I really resonate with. And in the beginning, most of my poems were angry. I mean, I was screaming out, my politics. I think I was screaming out how much I had closeted myself and how the world was reacting to my queerness when I first came out. And so grief for me and my first writings of poetry came out by a lot of screaming. And I once heard that people scream when they're in pain because screaming actually lessens the pain.
Mm.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
it legitimately did. I would scream on the microphone, I'd get off, and I would feel less pain, I would
Mhm.
feel better. And I think it was also helpful to other young queer people in the audience. And then over time, I started writing from a softer place, even though I might have still been yelling. But I was still, like, diving into the heaviest topics of my own life. I was writing about sexual assault. I was writing about friends who had died by suicide. I was writing about my own mental health issues, where of trying to take my own life, and then writing about war and
Mm.
things like that. And so
Mhm.
when I was writing in that way, I realized the necessity to not have the poem be all, I guess, what I would call darkness. And what I mean
Mhm.
by that is because I wrote something years ago that helped me reevaluate. some things, but the line was, even when the truth isn't hopeful, the telling of it is. And so I would say,
Mm,
okay, even if I'm just telling the whole story of the massacre at Pulse nightclub, and I
mm,
would be sobbing and weeping, and it would be kind of brutal to write these poems, but also helpful in moving things out. But I realized that they had to include beauty in the way that my first poems hadn't. The angry ones, I
mm,
don't think there was a whole lot of beauty, but I realized there was a necessity for beauty. There was a necessity to highlight a connection. Even there's this one image, and it's a really painful image to think about, but I wrote about it and when I was writing about Pulse nightclub, and about this young man who's in a bathroom stall texting his mother, and he keeps saying, "Mommy, I'm going to die. Mommy, I'm going to die." And
mm,
there was something about that. He was in, I don't know, his 30s. There was something about mommy in that moment,
mhm,
There, you all know, so much
mm,
love in these moments, in these horrific moments. The thing I think that also wakes up is this desperation to preserve connection and love and to reach out. So my work started then in these very heavy moments of grief, of just finding all these interwebs of love. And then
mm.
that would help me. And then Rebecca knows that since my cancer diagnosis, I've moved into a different sort of way of writing about grief. So I sort of say it like this, where say I wanted to write a poem about the horrors of factory farms, where
Mm.
in the past I might have written about just giving all of these details that are so painful to hear. Now I might write something like cows have best friends. And
Right.
Mm.
you feel the grief in that, because if we're talking about wanting to treat animals kindly, like you hear that, I believe you're still motivated in the same way towards action, but you have
Mm,
a different experience of grief, which is, it just wakes you to the love immediately, I guess. And so
mm.
that's where my work leans now.
I mean, there's just so many tendrils in there that we could chase down. I wanna start with one of the first ones, which was poems being spoken, and I remember sort of being in my 20s and discovering the spoken word scene in Denver and feeling the power of that and just being seen through someone's words. And I think being a young queer person who was sort of coming to love themselves and navigating a world that was not the norm or expectation that your families were going to accept who you were or understand.
Mhm.
So I want to just kind of reaffirm the power for an audience member of hearing that and the link between anger and grief. Like for me, coming out as a queer person in my I came out to my family probably around 21. My anger was very linked with my grief because I didn't want to have to hear the things that I heard from the people who loved me most. And so my anger was so tied to my grief. So
Mhm.
that really took me back to, some of those rooms at the Mercury Cafe and
Yes. I mean, right before I got diagnosed with cancer and the Mercury was potentially about to close down, there was this whole article that came out that where I said, when I die, bury my ashes at the Mercury Cafe,
Oh,
because it was so, it's just such a beautiful place. And it was so alive with all of it. You could be whoever you were there.
yeah, and
Mhm.
it was such a constant rotation of whoever you were, it was like swing dancing one night,
Yeah.
spoken word and hip hop one night. I saw the Foo Fighters for the first time there,
Yeah. Yeah.
late '90s, like, it was just such a place where you could be anything. There was no side eye. Everyone was supposed to be there. It was so beautiful.
Mhm.
There is something, like you say, about words living out loud. And there is just something so potent about how having your story be witnessed,
Mm,
having people understand. It just is so connective, and the loneliness just falls off of you. But I think that there's also something that is actually physically healing in the vibration of speaking, in the vibration of
Mm.
sounding out. Becca and I both see a similar energy worker who does sounding, and she
Mm-hmm.
sounds out my emotions. And I always just felt like, God, I could not even be making words, and this would be helpful.
Yeah, it is powerful. You compelled me to see her because you said she makes sounds and they sound exactly like my grief and I don't know how that happens,
Yeah.
and I was like, "Ooh, I like that."
Mhm.
And I called her and I was like, "Is there more than one person on the line?" Like her sounds are like a cacophony of sound. It's
Uh,
wild, and it
Mm.
was like that is an exact match for what's happening inside of me.
yeah.
It's powerful. And so, speaking of healing, what I know from our conversations, this sense of when you were diagnosed and maybe expected grief to be the first thing to arrive in your system, and it wasn't. What was that experience like? And that all your friends were saying, grieve, you can grieve. It's okay to cry.
Yeah, I think I wrote about it. Let your misery come out of the closet. No need to wear the straitjacket of joy everywhere you go.
Mm.
I Yeah, so I was a lifelong hypochondriac. I mean, really, it was debilitating. I had chronic panic attacks. I had
Mm.
an acute fear of death that felt like it was with me every single minute of my life. And then the thing that I feared the most happened. I got diagnosed with cancer, and then I woke up from the surgery that diagnosed me and was in a state of almost bliss that
Mm.
Mm,
I didn't leave. Yeah, for the whole first year. I
mhm,
was almost never not in a state of bliss.
Mm.
Yeah. It was interesting because I could kind of only be around my partner at that time. My friend community was in such deep grief. I mean, even being around them, it didn't bring me down. I felt like nothing could bring me down at that point. But I was like, oh, I wish so badly that whatever this thing that I've learned or that I'm experiencing, I could figure out or find a way to share. And I've been trying for all these years now to find words for it, which is why I've written so much. I've spoken so much constantly through this time. Yeah,
mhm,
it was definitely not what I expected. I had thought my whole life, I thought I would go insane. Like, because
mhm,
my mental health was so vulnerable, I was
mhm,
always on the verge of losing my mind, and I had lost my mind. I think once I had an actual sort of break where I just lost
mhm.
reality. Granted, it was, when I smoked marijuana. But and I just thought there's no way, and so much so that I always just hoped that I would never have any warning about my death, that it would happen
Mhm,
suddenly. This would have been my worst nightmare, to have somebody say, like, "You're gonna die in, like, 2 years."
mhm,
I would have thought I would have spent those 2 years just absolutely miserable, but the opposite happened. I woke up from surgery and, I mean, everything immediately felt different. It wasn't just the drugs that I was on. Everything
mhm,
felt different. I couldn't stop complimenting the nurses, my father. I just where I would have judged his politics the day before, I was just, like, looking at him thinking, "He's such an incredible dad."
Mm.
And
mm,
just, Meg and I had been struggling, and then suddenly there we were just seeing each other clearly, and it was almost like my life sort of filed into place, because I realized that the filing into place was truly accepting the chaos of this existence and that there
mm,
is no
Mm.
ordering everything so it just works out for you. And
Right.
so I sort of just opened up to the chaos, and I thought, this is chaotic. I have no idea what's going to happen. Holy shit, I could die in a month. And
mhm,
suddenly life blew open for me.
Mm.
mhm.
That's so beautiful. I feel like we've gotten that message, and maybe it's the message Rebecca and I, as people who like to control outcomes and make plans, need to continuously hear.
Shh.
So we just hear it from various oracles that come on podcasts.
Mhm, mhm,
I love the twisting, and you talked about this when you talked about grief in your poetry, right? Like, just the seeing something from another perspective, like seeing the grief of something from an angry perspective and then seeing it from a perspective of awe and wonderment. And it's like that, like we could be so stressed out about the chaos of life and the unpredictability of pretty much everything,
Yeah.
or we could just, I mean, some of us are forced to switch perspectives and see it from just the miraculous beauty of and awe of what's going to happen next and how generous this moment is. So I
Yeah.
continue to try to take that message in.
Yes.
Well, and I wonder too, in that process of kind of waking up and being like, whoa, there's bliss here. Were you thinking, oh shit, I don't know if I can be a poet anymore?
Mm.
I definitely couldn't be the poet that most of my people, I hate the word fans, so most of the people who follow my work wanted me to be. And
Mm.
what that was a politically outraged, chronically despairing about the state of the world, raging about the horrors of the world. I couldn't be that anymore. And it didn't in any way meant that I had less empathy for the world or less
Hmm.
empathy for the human experience. I just was in a state of celebration and I had to be true to where I am. And so I started writing from a state of celebration. And I could also see like this is just as necessary, like
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
all of it is important. Like telling the truth of like the terrible shit that's happening that's happening in Gaza right now, like speaking about that is so necessary. And then I just kept returning to a line that I had written in my early 20s, which was, Andrea, everybody knows what you're against. Show them what you're for. And I
Mm.
kept thinking, okay, what I'm for. And if I keep speaking about what I'm for, that too is activism. That too
Hmm.
is working towards a more compassionate, kinder world. And so that's largely the kind of writing that I've done since, is like a celebration of the beauty of this world, the love that connects us, the why, the just astonishment, reminding people that we were born astonished. We were never intended to grow out of our awe.
Mm.
I wrote about this recently and I keep talking about it, is that I think of awe as the most potent medicine in the world because I've never felt awe and shame at the same time. I've
Mm.
never felt awe and loneliness. I've never felt awe and judgment at the same time. And to me, tapping into our awe is so healing to us as individuals and as I believe it would be as a society.
Yes. And I remember part of me expressing my frustration and disappointment with the injustice of the world. I had a long stint of being very angry about it. And my expression of that anger was very aggressive. And I agree. It was so necessary. It was necessary for me as a younger woman. It was necessary for me in certain professional settings. But I sort of grew into a new place, and I remember there was a period of time when I thought, "Oh my gosh, if my 20-year-old self saw me, she would be like, 'Who are you, you yuppie sellout?'" Like
Yes.
but then I remember reading a quote, and it was a man who had sort of moved from on the streets marching activism, being arrested, to doing sort of more policy work. And he was saying, we need it all. Just what you're saying. Like, we need the angry voices and we need the folks who are able to go into what feels like negotiation. And we need the lovers in the world and the dreamers and the things that remind us in the depths of our sorrow that there is beauty, and that by celebrating that beauty, we are moving towards a more just, connected world. And so I just am so in love with what you said. And awe.
I love what you said because like the quote somebody said, I forget who said it, but if you're not outraged you're not paying attention.
Hmm.
And that was written by somebody who isn't paying attention unless they're outraged. But
Mm.
somebody else could say, if you're not celebrating you're not paying attention. If
Hmm.
you're not grieving you're not paying attention. If you're not terrified you're not paying attention. It's very different for all of us. And I think that I used to think that there was, well, I went through a little period of thinking, is there something morally wrong with me that
Mm.
outrage isn't what actually makes me the best vessel towards social justice or
Right.
when I am in awe, when I am in astonishment, when I'm feeling like love or peace, that is actually when I feel like I have the most to offer. I read something years ago that said that we can only create what we have first imagined. If we can't
Mm.
imagine it, we can't create it. So, with what you're saying, like, yes, the truth tellers of this is the these are the horrors that are the injustices that are happening right now. And also what I feel like I'm doing is, okay, let me keep imagining what the world could be, and let me keep sharing what I'm imagining as sort of a blueprint for like what we could create. And
Mhm.
so I think that yes, it's all of it. And for me, like, I also have to honor my own body and my own experience within the context of the world. And for me, I can't stay in that rage and feel like I'm honoring this time in my
Mhm.
life. So I'm sort of doing both at the same time. How can I be authentic to myself and also be a resource for the world?
Yeah.
That's so beautiful. I recently, I think last year it was my favorite book that I read. It's called The Four Pivots by Dr. Sean Ginwright, and in it, he talks about dreaming and how communities that have been systematically marginalized, that has sort of been taken away from us. And we have sort of come to this idea that the only way to get justice is to sort of fight to break down these systems that don't work. But in that, an oppressive tool has been not giving us the space to dream and be
Mhm.
aspirational and imagine. So I love what you're saying. And I think there's something beautiful about allowing people the space to lean into imagining a world that could be, and through that imagination,
Mhm.
little by little, bringing it into being.
And
Mhm.
you can sort of hear it, like, I've been following the student protest,
Mhm.
people protesting the genocide in Gaza, in Palestine. And I saw this one criticism of this one protest where all of the students were singing, and they were just singing these happy songs, and people were criticizing them. And I'm like, no, protests can look all of these different ways, and
Mhm.
celebration of life and togetherness, and like celebration of actually being people who want a more compassionate world is so vital too. So, even protest itself doesn't have to look a particular way. But I do agree. I remember, grew up in a group called Vox Feminista here in
Mhm.
Colorado, and it was a lot of screaming and a lot of anger, and we were always in protests. And the motto of our group was basically, you don't create art that you're not backing up with direct action. And I remember, this is totally off topic, but it's a grief thing that I've been thinking about as
Mhm.
I've been watching these protests. But I remember feeling like I wasn't cut out for it. I remember feeling like I'm not strong enough to do this. The first time, like, we met like a walls of riot gear, and I remember, like, it was supposed to be this peaceful, just kid-friendly protest. There were lots of children there, and I remember they just started randomly just chucking tear gas at this crowd that was doing absolutely nothing, and grabbing this little five-year-old girl's hand who I didn't even know, and just, like, running as fast as I could to try to get her out of that poison. And I remember the grief in that, and I don't
Mhm.
even know I'm saying this right now, but I guess it's just what's on my heart, and the grief in it, and then also so many protests that they're just singing and celebrating. And so what is the quote? Y'all know it, about dancing through the revolution?
Mm.
Some quote like, "The revolution must include dancing," or something, and
Mhm.
I'm off topic.
Sadly, when you try to look that up, Dance Dance Revolution is what comes up, which is not help.
That's right.
No,
That's
you're
right.
not off top nothing
Yeah.
is off topic here. We actually always find
Okay.
all roads lead back to grief, but I know for me, that experience of awe and the feeling of, I always call it like the zoomed out view whenever I'm in some kind of really acute local pain, and it's like life is hard, this moment is hard, these things are happening, my heart is breaking, and I can zoom out and just be like, oh my God, we are on a planet floating through space. We are humans, like, working so hard to human, and it's like it can take me from that more local pain. But what I actually find also when I touch into awe, it's like the purest grief, because there's something for me that becomes so heartbreaking about this beautiful planet we're on and this beautiful experience that we could be in, and then the ways that our pain dictates so much of the experience. And then I just feel that, like, oh.
Oh, Rebecca, so I think that I've shared with you that over these last 3 years, when I've lost my bliss or lost my viewpoint or my perspective, that sort of zoomed out feeling, somebody will say something, And then I'll be like, so right now I would say I've been about 2 weeks without it. And somebody will say something, and then bam, I'm right there, and you just did it.
Oh.
And like as you're saying, I'm like, oh gosh, that's it. It's this experience that I have of coming home again.
Mhm.
And so as you say that, yes, that awe, that expansive, like zoomed out place is such a place of awe, which is also what happens when somebody says you're going to die soon. It's
Mm,
like it's a shock, but it
mm,
is actual awe.
mhm,
And then there is a grief that lives in that awe that is, I guess what you're saying, like the purest grief, where
mhm.
you are taking in the expanse of the universe and you are feeling it all as one. And when they talk about non-duality, I wonder, I've never heard anybody speak about this, so maybe I've just discovered something the Buddha did not. But
Here comes the
You heard it
wisdom,
here,
listeners.
folks.
but I do wonder if there's a difference between grief and awe. Like, I wonder if there
Yeah,
is any difference.
I
It
don't
it's
know.
it
Yeah.
they seem so interconnected because even in my blissed out states, I mean, I was crying like 8 times a day, like
Mm,
but it
mhm,
would just be bursts and
mhm.
bursts of grief that were just like astonished grief.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't remember if I've shared this quote with either of you before, but my youngest brother, when he was 4, there was some moment that happened that was really sweet or beautiful. And he said, "My heart's so full, it's leaking out of my eyes."
Oh, God. Oh my goodness.
That
My
feels like what you're talking about.
Yeah, it really does. And ah, my godson who calls me Ankle because it's a mix between aunt and uncle,
Oh,
and he
ankle.
calls me uncle, and now he's 5, but his grandpa just died a couple of months ago,
Mm,
and he said, what did he say to his Alma? He has 2 moms, so he said, "Does a heart keep beating when a person dies?" And his mom said, "No, that's often why somebody dies is because like the heart stops beating, and that
mm.
can, be what happens sometimes." And he said, "Oh, I wish everybody could have 2 hearts." So that's so tender.
Wisdom of
I know
children.
the
Ah,
wisdom. I also wonder if sometimes the most highly sensitive people are those who appear to not be at all because
mm,
they've sort of in ways like sort of shut down, and I can't let things in because it's too much.
yeah.
I mean, I think I was when I was very young, and it was very overwhelming for my family to understand how I experienced the world, and so I shut it off, and then after my dad's passing, it just like I had no control, the damn gates just flew open, and there are some days when I'm like, I get why I built those walls because it is so much. The love too, like, both
Mm,
ends of it, they kind of connect, you're experiencing, and I think this is what we're talking about with the awe, like, you experience that bliss of awe, and in that is the tenderness of we are a moment, we are such a
Yeah.
flash in
mm.
anything, like, when I listen to astrophysicists talk about space, I get filled with tons of emotion because I'm like, "What a fucking miracle we are having right in this moment, this conversation, like,
I know.
what a miracle that this is happening because statistically, it's very unlikely that this would have happened in sort of the fullness of space and the immensity and the enormity of it. So there's just something like so full circle about awe and love and grief.
Uh, I love that. I feel the same. Like Rebecca knows I'm obsessed with space and I'm obsessed with the planets and everything.
Me too.
Like so much. And what's interesting about what you say is that so there's this project. It's called. Have you ever heard of the Golden Record?
Yes.
The
Oh,
Golden
also
Records,
obsessed with it.
like
Yes.
the original Golden Record. Folks sent it into space, like in I think 1975 or something
Mhm.
like that. The U.S. did, trying to make contact with extraterrestrial life and say, is anybody out there? And if you're out there, this is what it is to be human. That record tended to be very white and male. And so this group in South Africa has decided to recreate a new golden record that is like more inclusive of the whole human experience. But
Mm.
in addition to actually sending something out, they're doing it as a project to teach youth in South Africa and maybe around the whole world how to think about what it is to be human and
Mm.
how you would express the human experience to non-humans. And so anyway, I got invited to be on that record. And what was
Yay.
interesting about it is they asked, will you write a poem for this? And they're doing a test one that is actually being sent just to the moon. And the poem that I wrote is going to go live on the moon forever. So whenever we look at the moon, we're going to be like, Andrea has a poem on the moon.
That's
On the
so
But
moon.
cool.
but what's wild about it is when I got the ask to write it, it was like the day I found out the doctor said my cancer was incurable.
Mm.
And
Mm,
so the whole poem about explaining to other beings, like what the human experience is. It keeps weaving back to cancer. It keeps weaving
mm,
back
Mm.
to death. It keeps weaving back to, my little friend who is 6 and well, she was 6 when she lost her mom to cancer. And just I'm quoting lines of hers. And then my cousin had just passed of cancer. And then but the reason I'm saying this is to communicate the human experience to other beings feels so necessary to prioritize communicating grief and love and
mm,
loss. Like, I mean, I've heard, I don't know how much y'all study aliens, but I've heard
mhm,
that it's not always not every body dies. There are
mm.
dimensions and realms and like so introducing death as a is a
Yeah,
really interesting thing to introduce
Right.
death, because I do
right.
think in some, other dimensions, there is no death.
No,
And I don't necessarily think there is death in ours, like
right.
in how we think about it. There's a poet I love named Saul Williams who said, "Only believers in death will die." And I
Mm.
remember I was really young when I heard that, and I thought, "What does that mean?" But I love it. I love it. And now I kind of know. Yeah,
Now I
Yeah.
get it.
yeah.
Yeah. So I'm remembering when my dad died, which felt like my first, oh, this is grief. And there's nothing I can do to be like, stop crying or be okay. I mean, it was just raw. And my then husband was just holding me in that moment. And he didn't, I thought I said my dad died. He was like, whatever you said was unintelligible. I knew someone died because of the way you were
Mhm.
crying. And he had lost his dad when he was 15. So he's holding me and he said, angels envy your pain. And
Mhm.
that was such an impactful moment to consider, like beings in another realm who don't know this kind of suffering, who would be like, oh, I want to know that, where I'm like, I don't want to be in this much pain.
Mm.
It
Ah.
just took me to another place where I could let my grief just be because I was like, I'm having this really human moment.
Oh, that's beautiful, Rebecca. And it reminds me of like I always come on these podcasts and think of poems I wrote, so I hope it's not obnoxious that I keep quoting myself. But I wrote a poem that was because I was grieving a breakup, and then I was also having a really hard time with chronic Lyme disease years ago. And my therapist in therapy that day told me that there are some spiritual groups that believe that when a human dies, the soul actually goes through a period of missing the body. And I had
Mm,
always believed the opposite, and I do now. Like I don't necessarily think the soul is going to, but I wrote a poem about it because the poem helped me like form just a better relationship with my own body, its pain.
mhm,
So I'm saying throughout things like imagine when the human dies, the soul misses the body, misses the loose tooth, the stub toe, the funny bone, misses the fear cursing the wheelchair, misses the voice cracking, speaking out loud on the first day of school, like all these little things. But at the very
Mm.
end, and the universe is just saying, tell us again about that first gray hair and throwing it away. I can't imagine it, the stars say. Tell us again about goosebumps.
mm.
Tell us again about pain. And the thing that was most potent for
Chills.
me in writing that line was the stars being like, but wait, tell us about pain. like in an
Yeah.
excited way. And it was, and I remember when I wrote that line, and I was in a lot of pain at the time that I was writing it, I had a much different relationship to it because it was like, they're exactly what you said. Angels envy this. This is an experience in the
Mhm.
universe that is unique, I think. I
Mhm.
don't know if pain is universal. I know that
Right.
being, consciousness is universal, but we really don't know what else is universal. And we
Right.
say universal for this planet, but that's just earthal. Like we, you know, that's not
Earthful.
universal. Yeah,
Earthful. I
yeah.
love
I
it.
like that. Just like this appreciation for pain as being part of the experience, right? The things I'm able to do now. I love to work out, and I love the pain of 2 days later, it hurts to go down the stairs because I'm like, "My body fucking did
What? I
that."
can't relate.
I know, I know I know this isn't an everyone thing.
Go on.
But I think of that, or I think about the gratitude that I have when I do something that seems really hard, like a really hard workout, because I'm like, there is going to come a day, Andrea, when you are not going to be able to do this. So hold on to the discomfort because today my body can do it.
Mm,
I think I'm just kind of like folding in all of this reflection of the angels, the aliens, but also the us a week from now, 2 years from now,
yeah.
20 years from now, being grateful for the pain that we're experiencing right now.
Yeah. I've been writing a lot about how just facing my mortality in such an intense way has sort of put me in this place where I call it praying for what I already have. And
Mm,
so I feel like before it was like I always wanted to have something else or something more. And there is something about really tuning into your mortality, which nobody needs a cancer diagnosis to do,
Mhm.
mm,
to really be in a place where you're just every day, you're just praying for what you have. And so when you're in that place, it's interesting because a lot of things stopped for me, things that I loved that I thought I will be miserable without, like, for example, touring. I could not imagine a happy life if I wasn't touring, which I've largely not been able to do through these years. But with that mortality as this sort of backdrop of everything I do, then it immediately puts me in a place of appreciation for what I can do or appreciation for the fact that I get to do what Rebecca has been begging me to do since the
Stop
beginning of our
touring.
friendship, which is stop touring, or actually like recognizing that how I was touring was way too much. It was never
Yeah.
going to support my health or spirit to do it that
Mhm.
much. And while you think right now, okay, if I can't exercise, if I can't lift weights, if I can't
Right.
hike or whatever you do, you're not going to be able to. But the thing that might make you not be able to might also be the thing that makes it so you are thrilled, even more thrilled with what you are doing. I don't know. It's just
Mhm.
so wild. And the only reason I say this is because it's the experience I have, and I never, ever would have imagined it. But,
Mhm.
we think we know who we're going to be in the future and we think we know what we need.
right.
But really, what we need, I think, is just some very basic thing, which is to, I think, in many ways, escape need. And I know
Ooh.
it's a
Mm.
hard thing to wrap our brains around because the brains will never agree with that, ever, ever.
Mhm.
But the spirit knows something about that what we think we need isn't necessarily true.
Right. Well, and it's making me think kind of the experience of anxiety and how so often whenever I work with kiddos with anxiety, we talk about it's a fear of an imagined future. And
Mhm,
so even when you're talking about, gosh, I just like was thinking a cancer diagnosis would be the worst thing and that we have this fear of an imagined future and the imagined future isn't the diagnosis. What it is what am I going to do with that? And we actually don't know
mhm,
until we're in it. I never had a fear of a diagnosis because was so arrogant that I thought I'll never get cancer.
mhm,
And then I got cancer. In the moment of understanding that that was the diagnosis, I was fascinated by being alive.
mhm. Yeah.
it brought me right into being alive in a way I never felt all the time that I arrogantly thought I was going to live forever and never have any diagnoses. And
Hmm.
And I love the invitation that it doesn't take a diagnosis to tap into that. And back to our like alien conversation, I think we are also the stars, the aliens, the angels, right?
mm,
As we progress in life, we also want to tap back into those moments of our deepest humanity, which could be the beauty of it, the devastatingness of it, the amazingness of the lives that we've led. And I remember as a kid wanting to really figure out aliens. Like, I was just like, what could they be? Where could they be coming from? And I remember coming up with this theory that deja vu was a glitch in the matrix kind of thing. Like, it was a moment where, like, our time, whatever those are called,
the tendrils of time,
Yeah.
yeah, or like, the different universes kind of were like, "Oops, which
dimensions.
one?" Yeah, the different dimensions that we were in, and aliens were sort of coming back. They're us in the future coming back to study when we went wrong. So they're really like the evolved versions of us. Where exactly did we fuck it all up? And let's see if we can if we can study it. And that déjà vu gave us those moments of, "Whoop, here you go. You can either stay on the path or you have a moment here to get, into the other reality." I don't know. I think this conversation invites us into, like, the appreciation and the love of the now, and, like, that idea of we need what we have. There is no need because we truly do have everything inside of us to love and appreciate. And
What you said about deja vu is so powerful to me, like a glitch in the matrix. And I wonder if anybody's ever written a screenplay or a book about that, where when you say when somebody's saying, I'm having deja vu, there is actually something you can do when you have deja vu, where you then enter the portal
Yes.
and you figure out these other realms, like your other whatever it is,
Mm,
like your existence on another planet in another form, like all of it.
Let's
It's
work on it.
'cause it
yeah.
feels a little bit like that, doesn't it? Right?
Yeah.
Because you're
Yeah.
having this moment and you're like, "I know the next 4 things that are about to be said or happen," and
Yeah.
it does feel like maybe if I just turned around sort of in my psyche, there would be these doorways.
I love this. I could talk about this for ages.
I was gonna say, we probably just need one where we can just talk about space and aliens and
Rebecca and I have been talking that we have to have like an alien conversation, so maybe we could all do it together sometime.
Yes, that
I
would
am
be
in.
beautiful. Okay. Well, so Andrea, one of the things too, when we were talking about awe and grief and that intersection, I heard in my head a line from one of your poems, the one about squash, which to me was the griefiest that I had
Mhm.
ever heard, where you said, I will never be able to reconcile the shortness of your lifespan. And I
Yeah.
think that that's the awe grief connection for me in being human is even that is a short lifespan,
Mm.
and it's not being able to reconcile that.
Yeah. So a friend's dog died yesterday, and
Mm.
I've been thinking a lot about this because the first time my first dog, Tweedledee Boo Boo Gibson, died,
Oh,
somebody gave me a card that said it's one of the most extraordinary, generous, and just loving things we will ever do in our lifetime is choose to build family with beings whose lifespans are
Oh,
guaranteed,
stop.
almost guaranteed to be shorter than our own. And I remember it comforting me so much. I was in grief, but I also then got tapped into my courage and the courage of love, you know?
mhm.
And then I realized, I think at some point after that, it's like, wow, well, this is what we're all doing when we love.
All the
And,
time.
and, the, and the courage of it is, it's so much. But then also I think about lifespans, and I've been writing about that too. And I was really bummed because an editor told me somebody else had already written this. And I was like, no. But like how when I got diagnosed with cancer, I stopped measuring my life by length, but by width. And then the
Mhm,
other thing that I wrote about was that a short life doesn't always equate to a life cut short. A long life
mm,
doesn't always equate to a full one. And so,
Oh,
what is a full life? And so, I can feel that, we kind of think we feel it naturally if we see somebody pass at like 90 years old, but we've all known 90-year-olds who we don't feel like they had a full life, and that is where more pain comes in for me
mhm.
if I feel like the fullness wasn't there. But I also know, I feel know, that if I were to die soon, I feel like I would have an experience of having lived a full life, and it wouldn't be a life cut short.
Mm.
And yes, it's just so much courage to love. And yet we can't help but be courageous. And isn't that a beautiful thing that's just ground into our system? It's like in our DNA, you are born to be courageous because you were born to love, which means you were born to grieve. It's all so
Yes.
beautiful.
Oh my
Yes.
God. Ah, I have never thought of it that way. And being a pet lover, like an obsessive dog lover, I love my
Me
dog.
too.
Yeah, I'm like, "Oh." I will say Instagram, now that we have to be on it for all the grief, makes me feel more sane about my love for dogs because there are just so many
Yeah.
obsessive dog lovers on there. But there
Hmm.
is this reel that, is like, dogs only live for this long and you're their best friend. Like, you get many, hopefully, many best friends
Hmm.
throughout your life, but you're theirs. And now when I am playing fetch with my dog, I am like, puppy, this is everything right
Yeah.
now. Me and you here throwing this ball over and over again for 45 minutes is everything. And I love
Oh.
you so much. And we had a dog that I got when I met my husband, and he had never had a dog. So when she passed, he was broken. And
Mhm.
pretty soon after, I was like, okay, we got to get a new dog. And he just looked at me like horrified. How could you ever imagine loving another dog like we loved Annabelle Rainbow Sunshine Puppy Love, Hito and Mathern? And And I said to him really gently, I was like, "We will take time because I see you need it." But having owned many dogs, I was like, "I promise you it only makes your heart grow bigger." But
Mm.
hearing what you said, it was like, oh, the courage it took for my husband to open his heart to another dog.
Mm.
And I just am extending him love for being so
Yeah.
courageous and inviting this new insane puppy whose name is Banana into our lives.
Oh.
Andrew, what's your griefiest poem? What's for you the one that's the most grief?
I actually have one here on my computer that I thought might be interesting to read. It's called Love Letter from the Afterlife. And I wrote it, I think, in some ways for the people who love me. If in the event of my death, I keep having a dream of writing a book called In the Event of My Life.
Mm.
Mm.
But really, this came from my grandma Faye when she passed. And this sort of message came to me. And I imagine her writing back from the afterlife. But then I also imagined writing it to Meg.
Mm.
But anyway, here we go. Okay, love letter from the afterlife. My love, I was so wrong. Dying is the opposite of leaving. When I left my body, I did not go away. That portal of light was not a portal to elsewhere, but a portal to here. I am more here than I ever was before. I am more with you than I ever could have imagined. So close you look past me when wondering where I am. It's okay. I know that to be human is to be far-sighted, but feel me now, walking the chambers of your heart, pressing my palms to the soft walls of your living. Why did no one tell us that to die is to be reincarnated in those we love while they are still alive? Ask me the altitude of heaven, and I will answer, how tall are you? In my back pocket is a love note with every word you wish you'd said. At night, I sit ecstatic at the loom, weaving forgiveness into our worldly regrets. All day, I listen to the radio of your memories. Yes, I know every secret you thought too dark to tell me, and love you more, for everything you feared might make me love you less. When you cry, I guide your tears toward the garden of kisses I once planted on your cheek, so you know they are all perennials. Forgive me for not being able to weep with you. One day you will understand. One day you will know why I read the poetry of your grief to those waiting to be born, and they are all the more excited. There is nothing I want for now that we are so close. I open the curtain of your eyelids with my own smile every morning. I wish you could see the beauty your spirit is right now making of your pain, your deep-seated fears playing musical chairs, laughing about how real they are not. My love, I want to sing it through the rafters of your bones. Dying is the opposite of leaving. I want to echo it through the corridor of your temples. I am more with you than I ever was before. Do you understand? It was me who beckoned the stranger, who caught you in her arms when you forgot not to order for two at the coffee shop. It was me who was up all night, gathering sunflowers into your chest, the last day you feared you would never again wake up feeling light-hearted. I know it's hard to believe, but I promise it's the truth. I promise one day you will say it too. I can't believe I ever thought I could lose you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I wonder, like, what you're used to having happen when you read poems, and yet I imagine it never ceases to come back to you, our tears and our visceral response. So I hope you receive all this just love and appreciation and gratitude for what you put into the world. My God, thank you.
Thanks, y'all. And yeah, I do feel that. I feel the connection so much that sometimes I feel like the readers of my poems are the ones that are writing them and not me. So yeah, I feel that.
Oh, I love that. Well, let's move to our checkout. So this is where we just say, have you been touching into your grief? Yeah, Andrea, have you been touching into your grief this week?
So it was actually through another poet. Her name is Natalie Diaz, and her latest collection of poetry is called Post-Colonial Love Poem. And I'm on the board of this really incredible organization called The Word. And we brought her in as a keynote speaker. And so I was trying to like take this book in. And for me, sometimes poetry is like going to an art museum. I can appreciate it on the walls, but I sometimes need the context of an artist right there or the artist's story to help me dive into the piece. And that's how I feel about poetry. And so I could appreciate the beauty of it on the page. But when she came and she spoke, it was like I was immersed in her world, and it brought the beauty of it to life. And the moment, Andrea, you started speaking, the same thing happened. I have known and appreciated you from afar, but the moment you started to speak, it's like, oh goodness, you just are a living, breathing poet. Like everything that you say captures the human spirit. And I feel so grateful to be connected to you this morning, to have heard Natalie in person. And my butterflies are aflutter. They did not get into formation, y'all. They are just all over the place right now, but in a very beautiful dance. So there I am. Rebecca, how are you touching into your grief this week?
You know, I have this grief group that I am running around the book, The Wild Edge of Sorrow. So it keeps me reading about grief because I have to read each chapter and talk about whatever we're talking about that week. Ritual was one of the things that came up, and I have been feeling a certain reverence or awe for the way anything done with intention is ritual. So if something's bubbling up in me, and especially around grief, because it does feel like a lot of grief and tenderness has been here, it's like in that moment deciding, what ritual do I want to do with this? What intention do I want to bring to this? And so it can be, I'm going to light a candle, but it's just bringing so much attention to it. And I can start to create new rituals or things that I can share with my daughter. And so that's what I've been working with this week. And what about you, Andrea?
Well, I can't ever have somebody mention Natalie Diaz without like commenting, like, I know, I know that feeling. I absolutely love her writing. And I think it's particularly important right now. And,
Yeah.
but she has this gorgeous love poem called I Watch Her Eat the Apple that I really
Yes.
recommend
She
reading.
read it.
Oh God, it's so beautiful. She's so incredible. And she's also a basketball player. So I'm a basketball player poet too. And so
Right.
of course I've been
So call me,
enamored with it.
Natalie.
Yeah.
Yes.
Give me a call, Natalie. Where have I been? Well, so what I'm doing is I'm doing a lot of crying. Like I'm doing a lot of thinking. I'm feeling fear. and realizing I'm not actually feeling fear. I'm feeling grief. The grief is under there. And so I'm just bursting into tears in random places, wherever we are, wherever I am, and just public, in the grocery store, in the hyperbaric oxygen chamber, in the doctor's office, on phone calls with people, and just letting that be. And also like really working to not identify with my thoughts in those moments, because if my grief gets caught in my brain, then it never moves out. And so, yeah, I just want I want to welcome it, but I want to welcome it with my porous body of just, stay as long as you need to, but know there are doors. Thousands of them if you just want to come in and go out the back. So that's what's happening.
Oh, I love that.
I
Yeah.
do too.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for coming on today and talking to us.
Thank you,
Thank
y'all.
you.
This is really wonderful. Y'all are wonderful.
Love you.
Love you.